opportunity to join.
That's great. Yeah. I'm here with my two buds. My name's Dana Williams. I'm with H and Micah. We were just catching up on the weekend and life in general. This has been an interesting ride through the pandemic. Now we're into this next phase, which is where everyone's calling the Great Reshuffle. We're going to keep talking about this because there's a lot of content, and with all three of us having the consistency of being Clifton Strengths coaches and facilitators and working with corporate, we are finding a lot of similarities in what leaders are needing right now. So my company is called Dana Williams Consulting, and I really help leaders that are disconnected help get connected with their teams, with themselves, and grow their business. And I, former corporate girl, been entrepreneur now for a year and a half, and learning a lot and loving working with these guys. So we're here every 2 weeks, and today we're going to introduce ourselves, and then we're going to kind of chit chat for a little bit, and then we'll get into the subject. So please feel free to join in or write in your questions, and we'd love to hear from you. I'm going to kick it off to you, Micah.
All right. My name is Micah Lawrence. I am an ICF certified coach and a Gallup certified strengths coach. I work primarily with leaders, founders, and small business owners, working with them on leadership development, but also with their teams on team development, using the Clifton Strengths as really my primary tool. And I think a lot of people find that interesting. It's like, you bring that into everything? Like, yep, I do. It's interesting that if I did have a workshop, I don't remember if I told you all this, but I had a workshop in San Diego a few weeks ago, which, for one, it's so nice to be back in the in-person workshops. I'm getting more and more of those, and I love it. I'm so happy to be there with people in person. But I went to this workshop with leaders, and the leader that invited me to come speak, it was almost like a keynote presentation more than a workshop. But he didn't want to talk about Clifton Strengths because he had used a different assessment in a different environment, but it was still kind of like strengths-based development. So I brought in all of these principles that were strengths-based principles from Gallup's material, but I just didn't say anything about any of the Clifton Strengths, and it was awesome. It still landed really well with everybody, and they left with big takeaways. So I love that we incorporate that into everything that we talk about too, when it's relevant, because it's a powerful way to understand people and their behavior and their thought patterns and how we feel about things. And I just love it. So I'll hand it over to H.
Yeah, I do the same thing. My last 2 weeks, I did 2 senior leadership teams, facilitated, and their kind of strategic team development. Used 2 different assessments, but I still use the RISE model, and I talk as a tool to diagnose teams where they are. So I'm H. Muir. I'm a facilitator, sometime trainer. The name of my business is Lift Shop. Give your brand a lift, give your team a lift, give your organization a lift. So I work across those 3 areas. Some level of facilitation. I've been doing it 10 years, I think. Yeah. That's long enough.
And what's exciting is, as we've been on this process, we all met through Clubhouse, started working there, and then brought it over to LinkedIn. And every 2 weeks, we're here discussing a topic on leadership. And so was it 2 weeks ago, we kicked off, what if you're the leader in transition? What does that feel like, look like? What are some thoughts? And we had some good feedback from that. Today, we really want to talk about, what does it look like if you're that leader that is transitioning? And I don't know about you guys, but I've had several clients recently leave their current roles as, senior director, VP, move to new companies. And I know they're going through this right now. So there's a lot going on with this transition. So I'm excited about our topic today and how we can share and give some tidbits. So how are you guys feeling about this reshuffle? What are you hearing out there with your clients?
Well, I'm definitely getting a lot of so last time we did talk about the transition in between roles, like when you're looking for the next job. But there are definitely that group of leaders that just accepted their job, or they're within that first 90 days of that onboarding process, trying to figure out, how do I make an impression and what's the right approach? I definitely have actually just got contacted by an old coworker today asking, like, okay, I think I've gotten as far as I can on the Clifton Strengths by myself, and I need some help to maximize this role that I'm in. So
Awesome.
yeah, I think it's definitely relevant with as much shifting and transitioning as is going on in across many industries right now.
Yeah, what did they it's shifted from the great resignation to the great reshuffle.
Reshuffle. Yeah.
I did a session with the executive team of a client in March. And last week I did it with their senior teams, the executive team and their direct reports. So it went from
Mhm.
7 to 45, a lot of people.
Mm.
And the two
Yeah.
of the executive members are no longer with the, so they've left, right? And I'm like, holy,
Already?
yeah. Yeah. And
Oh
then you
my
throw the
gosh.
pandemic on top of it, and these 45 senior leaders. I bet anybody that had been with the company less than 18 months had not met the other people face to face. So
Yeah.
it's,
Huh.
it's this notion of, so how do we ensure how can we help you ensure that your onboarding, right, is successful, or and that you get the most out of it, and that you, and we were talking about this earlier, that you assimilate, right, if that's the right word, that you assimilate to your new job. And so we wanted to talk about that, and I'd throw it out to the audience and say, if any of you have questions about
Mhm.
what good looks like, or you want to understand, you've got a situation where you're either onboarding yourself or you're onboarding others, and you have a question about it, feel free to write the questions in the chat and we'll answer them, because we'll see them, but
We
we
like
can't
that.
type.
Ab-
Yeah,
Absolutely. And we can
We love
also,
the challenge of people giving us something on the fly and
yeah.
responding to it. Sorry, Dana, go
And
ahead.
I think there's some great stats that you're getting with this right now that are coming out in the media about this. But I think what we want to make sure is that you as a leader right now don't feel alone. That we've got you, and we've got some great resources for you here. And that's why we're doing this every 2 weeks. We feel like we've got enough content to go probably through the summer with as much as we have. But we'll just see how far we go today. But H, I'd love to hear some of the stats that you shared with us before the
yeah,
call, because I think that's going to help set the stage for where this is right now.
yeah. This comes from, there was a Harvard Business Review that was November, December 2021. So I don't know if you all can see that. It looks like that. It's a
Yeah.
pair of shoes
Mhm.
on springs. I'm not sure what that's a very ideation type,
Sure.
futuristic type picture. Um, but there were some stats in the article, that said, that I found interesting, right, about the people with this great resignation and all this reshuffling, that 49% of promoted within their current organization are underperforming up to 18 months later. That's high, right? And you got to, and
Yeah.
then McKinsey said 27 to 46% of executive transitions are seen as failure or disappointments. And that's internally. And so you think about, if you're getting internally promoted, they already recognize you have the skills. They hired you for them. You're familiar with the goals of the company. You understand what the company does. You understand the business and the goals, and you're a cultural fit. Yet, why are so many people not excelling? And
Yeah.
so, some of the things that can go wrong are, trying to do too much too soon.
Mm.
Um, Barricades go up, right? So there's competition from others, so you don't get the help, and you don't ask for the help. Um, I think one of the big things that the Harvard article talked about is this failure to build they didn't a, a network and be connected to that network. Um, the
Within
other
your new
thing,
team, like in the place that you're going to
Or
yeah,
outside.
or
or
even if
outside.
you're,
Yeah.
yeah, it's internally mostly to
Yeah.
build that
Okay.
network, and even if if you're you're with the same organization, but you get promoted to a new
Promoted.
job, is to
Mhm.
really have had an established power base and be
Oh yeah.
connected across functions at the peer level as well as up. And I think that's, was one of the biggest things that they
Yeah.
talked about. And the other thing that they said, and I think this is probably more true when you're coming to a new company, that the earliest missteps are the most damaging, right? And so if you try to do too much, If you're new to the company, you
Yeah.
don't understand the culture, you don't understand the business, and you make an early mistake, it's kind of like making a bad first impression. If you make a bad first impression, it takes a dozen impressions to overcome that. And I think
Right.
that's true when you're onboarding or assimilating. How do you ensure that you're taking the right steps? So I'll
Well, and
stop there.
yeah, that was the one that you just mentioned and that you mentioned before was the one that stuck out to me, that doing too much too soon. I wonder if it's actually, so before you mentioned it, I was thinking about some conversations that I've had recently, even just in a workshop I had today. I woke up at 1:30 this morning to do a couple of workshops in Germany that were
Oh,
being done
wow.
in Germany, and I'm doing it every day this week until Thursday. So I've
Wow.
got 1:30 a.m. workshops all week. I know I pulled an H this week, but one of the things that we talked about is that the people with high strategic strength kept using, before we even talked about strategic, they kept using the word challenging the status quo, or the phrase challenging the status
Mm,
quo. I heard repeatedly a couple people say that that's what they do. And I was so excited to get into the conversation about strategic, to talk about that aspect of strategic strength, being somebody who challenges the way that things were done. Like, I'm not just going to do things the way they've always been done because that's how it's always been done. I'm going to find a better way. And that's a very strategic strength way of thinking. And so it actually made me think of the reverse as well. If I'm a new leader going into an organization or being even interviewed for a role, if I have strategic strength and I knew myself well enough, I should be asking before I get the offer, what are the expectations for this role? Am I supposed to come in and keep things the same and improve incrementally? Or do you want me to come in and shake things up and make things better? Because I'm going to find my own path if that's what you're looking for. And if you're not setting expectations before you take on that job, you're going to be working against your own strengths. If they just wanted continuous improvement and no big changes, and you can't help but challenge the status quo, you're going to go in as, like H was saying, a too much too fast kind of person. And on the reverse, if they're looking for somebody with strategic challenge the status quo kind of leadership, and you're not that person, you're a continuous improvement kind of leader, again, you're setting yourself up for failure if you're not asking those questions before you get the job, so that you're ready to do what you do best when you actually start onboarding.
yeah,
Um,
I
Go ahead, Dana.
agree. I agree. And I think it's having a set of questions that you ask, like what's working well, what's stuck, what's needed to change. What are those things that you can have in your, but then not only asking them during your interview, but after you get on board as part of your one-on-ones with each
Regularly.
person, so that you
Yeah.
start hearing and taking the time. I think it's what you're saying, H, don't rush, taking the time to build the relationships, build the trust, get to know the folks. And I think it's having those questions that you can ask the same questions almost to everybody, and you'll start hearing a rhythm or a theme or a pattern. But I think it's rushing. Some of us want to just execute and get going and make a big change. And really, that, to what I'm hearing you say, H, to your detriment, to somebody that just jumps right in and doesn't take the time to assess the team and really understand. It's like doing your own little forensic on the team.
Well, so you know where I'm going.
I know where you're going.
So what you just described, jumping in too soon, executing, challenging the status quo is a strategy, right? And you can't do those until you have the right information. And by the way, you have to build commitment. You have to build relationships, so you bring people along on the journey. That's the RISE model, right? And that's what we use, which, by the way, is exactly what this thing talks about. So when we talk about the RISE model, we're talking about the 4 domains from Strength Finder, right? So R is relationship building. I is influence, which also I include information sharing in that. S is strategy. Strategy at its simplest is making decisions. And then E is execution. And so the Harvard article talked about the first thing you have to do is build a broad network. You have to connect, right? And you're connecting cross-functionally with peers, so that you've got a sounding board. And what they talked about, which I thought was really interesting, and this goes into first impressions, right? When you're making first impressions, the first thing that people look for is that you is ask themselves is, can I trust you? And to trust, you got to generate warmth. So if you've got relationship building, like Micah comes with his positivity, Dana and I show up with our individualization, right? That's how we naturally generate warmth. But the other way, if relationship building isn't your strong domain, how do you do that? And the point that you all alluded to is ask questions and listen and seek to understand and learn about other people. I think that really builds relationships. So they said that was the first one, was build this broad network. And then the second thing was what they called generate pull, which is influence, right? And what they talked about here, which I loved, was find ways for mutual wins, find ways you can help others win, which I think is one of the things we see all the time is influence is I'll say this poorly, the least frequent domain, or there's people have less strengths in that domain. And so it's not like, oh, how do I go get me some woo? How do I develop my woo? It's more, how do I leverage my strengths to be influential, right? And in this case, mutual wins, right? Reciprocity is a great way to do that.
Have you noticed, though, that people with high relationship building strengths and low influencing strengths tend to almost resent isn't the right word, but that's what came to mind. Almost like resent the influencing strengths. Like I don't want to have to generate pull. I don't want to have to be persuasive. I don't want reciprocity. I want to build relationships that are authentic and let those things happen naturally. And it can be hard for them to accept that those are also good things. Having influence, generating pull are a part of your job as a leader. And you can do it with a heavy leaning on your relationship building strengths. But there's nothing icky about being persuasive. That's something that it's another tool in your tool belt, and you can do it in an authentic way. But have y'all noticed that it's almost like they don't like that as much? Relationship builders don't like the influencing strengths as much, or it makes them feel off?
Absolutely. And I think especially those, we see that lower, as H is saying, we see that lower in most people's team grids. And it's just knowing how to use that and knowing it's okay. I can influence one of my other domains. And that's a whole nother topic we got into.
Yeah.
We do have a comment from Holly. She wanted to H, if you could just mention the article that you found.
It's a magazine, right? It's an HBR.
Yeah. So Holly, it's from, it's the Harvard Business Review. It's from December 2021. And it's how to succeed quickly in a new role. Which, by the way, I think if you just Google and go to Harvard, you could just buy the article because there's not a series. It's just the one article, which I think is interesting. And it's by How to Succeed Quickly in a New Role, 5 Ways to Build a Strategic Platform. The authors are Rob Cross, Greg Pryor. We'll put it in the notes, but if that helps, you should.
Yeah. Thanks for your question, Holly.
Yep. So, Micah, to build on what you all were just talking about, why do you feel what I see why people strong in relationship building, and I don't know if you said resent or are.
I said resent, but I don't think that's the right word.
Yeah, but I think why they're skeptical of influence, people strong in influence, to me, the underlying behavior is assertiveness. That they see that assertiveness, take action, being forceful, that underlines that influence because you act with confidence on a lot of those strengths in that domain. They see that as off-putting, right? That it doesn't create harmony. It may not be positive, that it's action, and so, and also the watch out for, for those of us that have influencing strengths is that if we only ever influence for ourselves or our needs, then people don't trust people who are consistently out for themselves. And I think those are what I see people strong in relationship building are in conflict sometimes when with folks who are high in influence.
And maybe they've just been burned by because there aren't as many influencing strengths out there. If people are using them immaturely or not intelligently, then we're getting burned by people not leveraging their influencing strengths well, and it leaves a bad taste in our mouth.
And I love
Yeah.
how you say generate pull to represent influencing. I think that's a neat way of saying
I
it.
liked it too.
Yeah,
By
I
the way,
like
that
that
was
too.
Harvard said that, I didn't.
Okay, okay, well.
But yeah, it
You
is.
would you would have though if it weren't for them. That's
You would
something
have had
you
an
would
acronym with it.
Well, and I think maybe, by the way, I think that's the thing
Here we
is
go.
the relationship builders see it less generating pull and more generating push.
Well, and
Mm.
trust. It's through trust.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm,
If you're
Yeah.
pushing, right? That's influence folks can be, they can be pushy.
mhm,
That's our watch out. So
mhm.
yeah.
That's
So
funny.
then the other two, and then we can so the Harvard part, the relationship, right? The R, talk about building a broad network and connecting across, cross-function peers, right? And you're looking to build trust, but also you want that sounding board. The second one is generate pull. That's really about the influence and look for multiple wins. The third thing is this is your strategy, right? Identify how you add value. And I think, Micah, you should have a sense of that, right? With your hiring folks of, is your value going to be as a change agent, continuous
Yeah.
improvement? What's your role? But I think it's important that you don't jump to that right away and act too soon. One, because you've got to get people, you've got to get that input from others so that when you're adding value, that you can connect it back to what's in it for them, and you have people to support you.
I have a thought on this. And I
Yeah.
want to just throw it out there to you guys. So we've been talking about building your personal brand, right? I mean, and you're talking about coming into a new organization or being in the same organization, being promoted. I think the personal branding story of your story, your vulnerable story of who you are and what you've learned and your story that you create can be really powerful to share in those moments when you're connecting with your new team, when you're connecting. And I think that's one of the challenges that a lot of people haven't taken time to write and know kind of their mission, their story. And I'm just curious about that. And while y'all are pondering that, I also looks like we got a question from Melanie too. She's
She
talking about,
supports
yeah,
H's
the
acronyms.
domains. Okay, good, Melanie.
But
Thank
it looks
you.
like she's saying she's split.
Yeah.
Her own strengths are split between relationship building and influencing, and she feels that pull even internally. That's interesting. That
Oh,
push pull.
I feel
Yeah.
it where
Oh yeah,
it's,
you're similar. That's right.
yeah, I have individualization and I have communication, right? And so
So,
I think I felt, Melanie, I felt it more when I was internal, because I had longer term relationships, and eh, I would see that conflict, right? I had to build trust and have my team and my peers, but I also wanted to influence, and so I was much more assertive, and yet felt guilty about it sometimes when I was internal versus external as a consultant facilitator. My influence is through words, and but I'll say different. I'm much less assertive than I would be if I was internal. So,
Hmm.
but I
and
have felt that pain.
I think that goes back to knowing your story and being able to share your story in a simple way that people can follow you. And in other words, instead of them creating a story, you creating a story in your head about what you think is going on, that you've kind of sat down and you've written out, what is your brand story? What do you stand for? What do you believe in? What are your thoughts? And then as people, and here's my 5 strengths, and
Yeah.
here's where it gets me in trouble. Here, and just really sharing with your new team, kind of individually as a group, kind of your story. I think that's powerful.
Oh yeah. I talk all the time about the difference between the passive and active strengths, and I think a lot of times we show up until I've done a workshop with a lot of working professionals. They often just show up the way that they show up, and they don't ever think
Mhm.
about it being a choice. It's like, well, this is the way that I am, this is who I am, this is how I think. And so it's almost like a passive approach to how I show up at work. And that's what we're trying, I think, Dana, that's what
Mhm.
that recommendation does, is it allows you to bring some more self-awareness to the table and
Mhm.
put in writing, this is how I choose to show up at work based on who I am, how
Mhm.
I behave, and how I think. And that intentionality makes it more active. You're showing up the way that you've chosen to, not just passively being who you are.
Yeah.
And then
So
role modeling that for others too, right? For your team.
Yeah, that would be empowering.
when I do new leader assimilations, there's I always instruct the leader, right? So I'm gonna get to the brand part in a second. So to set up new leader assimilation, think about I use the RISE model, right? And I survey the team, like because you don't want to do it in their first week or month on the job. You want to let them get some traction so they can get some initial feedback. So we catch missteps. And so
Mhm.
I'll ask their people, how have they built trust? How are you getting along with them? That's the R. How are they communicating, sharing information? That's the I. How are they making decisions, strategy? And then how are they executing? How well are they collaborating, right? So use the RISE model essentially to ask the team how they're doing. But part of that new leader assimilation too is the new leader is going to talk about themselves. And you can either do this as part of this process or do it earlier. And I say, here's the 5 questions your people want to know. And the first one, Dana, gets back to what you were talking about. What's your personal brand? The first question is, who are you? And
Yeah.
so I always talk about who are you is where have you been? What's your journey? And what have you learned? The second question, why did you take this job?
Mhm.
Right? And even if it's internal, why did you take this? Is it, because you're a brand person, you love marketing and you love building teams? You have an answer for that, have a point of view. The third question, how do you work? So in other words, it's, hey, and this gets into, you could use personality assessments, Strength Finder, all of those to really start to talk about, I'm everything from I'm an early riser, and I have them get specific to say, here's my pet peeves about email or about technology. Here's how if you want to get in touch with me on the weekend, here's how you do it. Right. So I'm
Norms.
yeah, norms,
Yeah, I
100%
love
norms.
norms. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love it.
But it's really talking about how they work. Then the last 2 questions are, what can we expect from you? Meaning, what's your priorities and what are you going to do about it? And the second one is here's what I expect from you in the next 30 to 60 days. And that's having those questions, right? It's taking your personal brand, but it's also because if you're a new leader, your team, this is your team, is informing. And in the forming stage, we work on having a common language like Strength Finders. So we can so that when I know that Dana says she's futuristic, I go, oh, I know exactly what that means. And Micah's positive, we understand each other because we have that common language. But the second thing is you got to build that trust, because that's what you're really focused on early on, is to set expectations. And I think early on in the forming stage, people will defer to this new leader and go, what's your expectations? And I think those 5 questions start to get at least an initial framework.
Cool.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned the open communication, like creating an open communication. Here's how I like to be communicated with. I think that's something that people want to hear. And I think what was coming to mind too when you were sharing this is showing their whole self, not just showing, I'm H. I love to golf on the weekends. I love a good beer. I'm, just showing the whole life, not
a good
just,
IPA.
here I am at, a facilitator or a leader, but here's who I am. This is my whole self. I have all these kids, or I have this kid, or, whatever it is. I think people want to know because they want to know you care about their children, their lives. And that gets into that well-being idea. But
so when they talk about who they are, it's like, if you don't talk about some personal stuff, right?
Yeah.
By the way, one of the things I always encourage, it's like, if you got a team, you put it out there. I'm like, yep, Packers,
Yeah.
Bucks, here it is.
Yeah.
Because it's also, it is a safe, because you think about, right? What can I talk about and be vulnerable so that they get to know me that's safe, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm in Chicago talking about being a Packers fan may not be safe, but
safe psychologically, but maybe not.
The other thing that's safe, I always talk about, 3 things that are safe. One is where you come from, right? Geography.
Yeah.
Hey, I come from Kansas City. I love barbecue. And if you want to talk about the different types of barbecue, pack a lunch, because I'm going to tell you how Kansas City's better. And 2, so
better
geography.
Texas? We can't go into that.
Well,
no, we can't.
We don't have time.
No,
Franklin barbecue
is
Franklin barbecue is probably is
Yeah,
a
that's down
yeah,
that's down the road from me.
love
That's
Franklin Garbage.
yeah, come on down. We'll take you to
Yeah.
Franklin.
But if you talk
Yeah.
about your geography, where you've been, to what you're passionate about, what you love to do,
Mhm.
and family, those are three things
Yeah.
that are safe that everybody can relate to and you can talk about.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think
Did
bringing
we
in
talk
that.
about Oh, sorry, go ahead,
No,
Dana.
go ahead. You go fine. You're good.
I was just gonna say I was looking at the time and I know we're about out of time, but I don't know if we got to E. I was following.
oh, yeah,
Did
the
we get
last
to
one
how to
is
scale?
so yeah, for the Harvard article, right? It's R is relationship is about building a broad network to, and connecting with others. Influence is about generating pull. This is Harvard. Strategy is about how do I add value, identify that. And then execution is about creating scale. And then the fifth one is really about ensuring your well-being, which play, I mean, that's if you took
Yeah.
Strength Finders, it's the 4 domains and just added well-being, which is
Huge.
that kind of encompasses all of them. And but
Yeah.
I just found it fascinating that this article really aligned with
You know,
Strength Finders and what we're
I
passionate
never really equated this with well-being, even though I knew it intuitively. But whenever I meet with a leader who describes themselves as being in a funk, I'll let them vent a little bit and just express like what's going on.
Mhm.
But I often will go right to their top 10 strengths and I'll just go from number 1 to number 10 and I'll ask them, it's like, as a learner, are you getting enough time to learn about things that you want to learn about,
Mhm.
not that you're expected to learn about? As a leader with high intellection, do you have enough free time alone by yourself to think about and process what's going on in your environment? And it's the needs that underlie each of these strengths that are in their top strengths. And almost every time there are big aha moments where they realize, no, my needs associated with my strengths are not being met. And it's like, great, what are you going to do about it? And it's a cool way to think about well-being from a very tailored, customized to them way because of their strengths.
I love that. I think one of the other things we learned last year is just to go ahead and do a quick assessment with your people and train your leaders to do this. And I love working with leaders on this, is teaching them how to check the well-being of the people in their purview. And just by a quick, okay, everybody, 1 to 10, how are you doing
Check
today?
in.
Are you doing a check-in? And then they don't have to tell you their score. 1 to 10, I'm a 6 in social, I'm a 5 in physical, whatever it is. But they have it and they can quickly get to their mean score of where they are by dividing by 5, taking the 5 areas of well-being and then adding them up and dividing by 5. I think that is a super tool to use. And I
Yeah,
try to
I like
do
that.
it now at least once a month with my leaders that I'm working with, because we know leaders are burnout, right? There's a lot of change. This
there's-
change is causing the burnout, and helping them identify, oh my gosh, I haven't had any time to work out. Or, yeah. Oh, well, how are you going to use your strategic what are you going to use to help you do that? So
to build on that, the number one driver of confidence, right? So if you're leading change or you're in change, you can handle the change to the degree that you're emotionally confident. What's the number one driver of confidence? Playing to your strengths. So,
yeah.
Micah, the exercise you just talked about, right? Number one driver is understanding, are you getting the opportunity to live your strengths so that it's energizing? Number two driver, and this is what I tell my clients all the time, are you practicing reflective development? Especially if you're an
Nice.
executor, right? Because you just go on to the next. You haven't
Right.
internalized all of the stuff and progress you've done, and therefore your confidence starts to lag your competence. I find that it's just a good leadership team
Combination.
practice.
Checkpoint. Yeah.
Love that.
Love it.
Yeah.
Wow. I feel like we
There's
just didn't
Holly
even-
talking about barbecue again.
Oh,
The
Holly.
we're gonna have to do a whole barbecue session
well,
Yeah,
at some
the
point.
best
Holly,
place.
I'll give you this. One of the best barbecue places, and it's Kansas City barbecue, is called Oklahoma Joe's. You can have that.
I don't know. We've got some good barbecue right there in Austin, almost right by Micah. Yeah.
Yeah, I
we
just
got
did a new
really
one
that
good
was
this
actually
weekend.
the client I
Yeah.
was with last week makes Oklahoma Joe's smoker.
Oh my goodness.
All
Wow.
right.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Well, I think we are going to continue this conversation because we barely scratched the surface today. So I think we'll continue to talk about leadership onboarding. What does that look like? What is the first 90 days? Not rushing. I think I love what you shared with us today, H, We've got some great comments from our folks on LinkedIn Live today. Thank you guys for being here. We will be back again 2 weeks from today at noon, and we'll continue this conversation. We'd love for you to send in your questions or your thoughts as you're navigating this with your clients and your teams. It will help us as we continue to build content for you. So I'm going to go ahead and kick it off to H and Micah to say goodbye, but I just want to thank everyone for being here with us. Oh, I hear Holly's going to go back and listen to part 1. Good, Holly. Go back.
Yeah, listen to last week. It is
Yes.
sequential.
Yeah, it's building.
Yeah.
So.
Which is rare for us.
Yeah.
Right?
Ideation, right?
We have to
It's
force
sequential with a
ourselves.
lot of like random
Yeah.
divergent paths.
That's right. That's right.
That's
But
great.
thank you guys for being here today. Thank you, H. Thank you, Micah. We'll let everybody say goodbye.
Thanks,
and
Dana.
we'll see you on 2 weeks.
Bye,
See you in 2
everybody.
weeks.
All right. Okay. Thanks.